Millionaire Heiress pretends to be paralyzed to test her husband. But Black Janitor proves true love. The mansion stood like a cathedral of wealth, its walls glittering with chandeliers that spilled rivers of gold light onto polished marble floors. Every surface gleamed, every corridor echoed with the quiet footsteps of servants trained to vanish into the background. To the outside world, Evelyn lived in paradise, heiress to an empire, adored at galas, draped in gowns that shimmered under camera flashes. Yet within those walls, her heart beat in hollow rhythm, a prisoner inside her own gilded cage. At the long dining table, meant for 20 yet set for 2, Evelyn sat across from her husband, Charles. His smile was flawless, the kind perfected for boardrooms and cocktail parties, but when his eyes lifted from his plate to meet hers, they carried no warmth. He asked about her day in the tone one might ask about the weather, obligatory, dismissive. Evelyn nodded, forcing her own practiced smile, and listened as he recited his triumphs in business deals she no longer understood nor wished to. When dessert was cleared, Charles rose, kissed her cheek without touching her skin, and excused himself, a habit. Always another call, another meeting, another excuse to leave her in silence. She looked around the cavernous dining room, the crystal glasses catching the chandelier's glow, and felt the loneliness press against her ribs. Later that night, wandering the upstairs hallway, Evelyn paused as she passed Charles's study. The door was ajar and his voice spilled out, low and sharp. She froze, holding her breath. "I didn't marry her for love," Charles muttered into the phone, his voice steeped in irritation. "I married her for security. If she weren't rich, I'd be gone." The words sliced through Evelyn like shattered glass. Her knees weakened, her hand clutching the gilded banister for support. She had always suspected distance, but betrayal spoken aloud was a wound too raw to ignore. Her eyes blurred as she stumbled back toward her bedroom, her mind a storm of disbelief and clarity. All the jewels he draped upon her shoulders, all the vacations staged for photographs, every tender smile he wore in public, hollow, rehearsed, purchased with her fortune. She pressed her palms to her face, shaking. The silence of the mansion mocked her grief. By the mirror, she gazed at herself. Perfect hair, flawless gown, the picture of privilege, and yet beneath it all, unseen and unloved. For years she had asked herself, does he love me or does he love the world I gave him? Tonight the answer had spoken itself. But Evelyn was not a woman who surrendered easily. Somewhere deep, beyond her grief, a dangerous idea began to take shape. If vows meant in sickness and in health, then sickness would become her crucible, her test. If Charles truly loved her, he would endure. If not, his mask would fall. The plan formed in whispers of defiance. She would stage an accident, a fall that left her paralyzed, at least in appearance. She would surrender her legs, her mobility, her freedom just to strip away his lies. Doctors could be convinced, staff could be managed. It would be her secret trial, her private battlefield. That night, lying in her vast bed beneath a ceiling of carved roses, Evelyn stared at the chandelier overhead. Its crystal facets fractured the light into cold shards that scattered across the room like broken promises. Her chest rose and fell with steady resolve, her lips trembling as she whispered into the emptiness. If he loves me, he'll stay. If he doesn't, I'll know the truth. The house was silent, save for the faint hum of the city beyond its gates. Evelyn closed her eyes, her heart pounding with both dread and determination. In the shadows of her opulent prison, a test had begun, one that would shatter illusions, destroy facades, and uncover a love she never expected. And so the cage that had held her became the stage for her gamble, a gamble that would change not just her life, but the lives of those she never imagined would touch her heart. The accident was staged with precision. A carefully orchestrated fall down the marble staircase, timed when the house staff would be close enough to panic, but too far to see the calculation in Evelyn's eyes. Her cries echoed through the mansion, and within hours doctors were summoned. Men in white coats, loyal to her family's fortune, carried out the charade with solemn faces. The damage is severe, one of them declared in Charles's study, his tone heavy with practiced regret. "I'm afraid your wife will never walk again." Charles's expression tightened, but only for a moment. He pressed his lips into a line, then returned to Evelyn's bedside, taking her hand with a gesture that felt rehearsed. "Don't you worry, darling," he said, his voice too smooth, too polished. "I'll take care of you, always." His thumb brushed her knuckles, but his eyes darted toward the clock on the wall. The first few days were filled with flowers, visits from his society friends, and Charles at her side like a dutiful husband. But the tenderness was brittle, like glass ready to crack. By the second week, the facade began to crumble. Evelyn sat by the window, her wheelchair gleaming in the morning sun. Charles entered, his phone pressed to his ear. He smiled at her briefly, then turned his back. "Yes, the doctors say she's... well, it's permanent. A burden, really. No, I'll manage. For now." His voice lowered, but Evelyn's heart caught each syllable. Nights grew colder. Charles stopped joining her for dinner, preferring to host extravagant soirees in the ballroom, while she dined alone upstairs. Laughter spilled through the vents, champagne corks popping, violins playing, voices rising in careless joy. She could picture him, raising glasses, smiling that glittering smile he never spared for her. One evening, curiosity drew her quietly down the hall toward the grand dining room. She stopped short at the sound of his voice, drunk and unrestrained. "My wife?" Charles chuckled, slurring words. "She's practically useless now. A beautiful doll with broken legs, a cripple locked away in her wing." "But I still get the fortune, so what does it matter?" His friends roared with laughter, glasses clinking. Evelyn's breath hitched. Her nails dug into the arms of her chair, tears burning her eyes. The test was working, but the truth it revealed was crueler than she had feared. The mansion, once a palace, became a prison. The chandeliers felt cold, the marble sterile, the gilded frames mocking her solitude. Her wheelchair creaked as she moved from room to room, a queen dethroned within her own kingdom, and yet, amid her despair, a new presence emerged. Marcus, the janitor, slipped quietly into the edges of her days. Tall, broad-shouldered, his uniform worn from years of labor, he carried himself with humility that made him invisible to the glittering guests. But Evelyn noticed the way he lingered when others passed by, the way his eyes softened when they met hers. One night, after another storming exit from Charles, his perfume of whiskey and resentment trailing behind, Evelyn sat alone in the dim corridor. Marcus lingered by the doorway, mop in hand, hesitating. "Do you need anything, ma'am?" His voice was low, cautious. "Water? A blanket?" Evelyn looked up, startled. His question was simple, but in it she heard something she hadn't felt in months: sincerity. No performance, no calculation, just kindness. Her throat tightened, words trembling as they left her lips. "No one has asked me that," she whispered. "Not in a very long time," Marcus nodded, a quiet acknowledgement. He didn't move closer, didn't overstep the invisible line society had drawn between them. Yet his presence filled the emptiness Charles had left behind. As he walked away, Evelyn felt a strange warmth stir in her chest. Her test had revealed her husband's cruelty, but it was also unearthing something else, something unexpected, something real. That night, lying in her vast bed, she replayed Marcus's words. They echoed louder than the laughter of Charles's friends, louder than the promises her husband had broken. And for the first time since her plan began, Evelyn realized this was no longer just about exposing Charles's heart. It was about discovering her own. The days stretched into weeks, and Evelyn's deception weighed heavier than the silken gowns she once wore with pride. What had begun as a calculated test now felt like a sentence. Charles no longer bothered with the mask of devotion. He entered her room less and less, each time with eyes colder than the last. His kisses on her forehead had turned into brief nods. His words, once hollow but sweet, were now edged with disdain. One morning, as Evelyn sat in her chair staring out at the gardens, Charles stepped in, already buttoning his suit jacket. "I'll be gone for a while," he said flatly. "Business in the city. Don't wait up." He didn't kiss her, didn't even glance her way as he left. The slam of the door echoed through her chest like a final verdict. Nights became longer in his absence. His perfume, expensive cologne mixed with the faintest trace of whiskey, lingered in the sheets but not in her arms. Evelyn endured the silence with clenched hands, her heart heavy with the proof she had sought but never wished to find. Charles loved her wealth, not her. He loved the glitter of her world, not the woman herself. In the cracks of this despair, Marcus appeared like a quiet flame. His steps were steady, his presence almost invisible at first. But then he began leaving traces of care in her life. A novel rested on her nightstand one morning, its pages marked with notes in neat handwriting. "It was my mother's favorite," he said when she asked. Another day, he wheeled her into the garden, where roses leaned toward the sun, letting her breathe air untainted by chandeliers and empty halls. When her wheelchair squeaked, ignored by others, Marcus crouched down with a wrench and grease, repairing it without a word. Piece by piece, dignity returned. Their conversations began in fragments. Evelyn, at first guarded, answered his gentle questions with clipped words. But Marcus's sincerity broke through her defenses. He told her of his late mother, a woman who scrubbed floors so he could stay in school, who died with calloused hands but a heart full of love. Evelyn shared memories of her childhood. The nights she wandered the mansion halls alone while her parents hosted glittering parties. The way she once wished for a single bedtime story instead of another diamond bracelet. Slowly, the space between them grew smaller, not in distance but in understanding. Marcus spoke of dreams deferred, of books he longed to write but never had the chance. Evelyn listened with rapt attention, realizing that beneath his uniform stood a man richer in spirit than anyone who filled her ballroom. And when she spoke of her fears, that she was unloved, unseen. Marcus listened, not to respond, but to understand. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the garden in gold, Evelyn looked at him with tears pressing behind her eyes. She never intended to let anyone in. Her plan was meant to expose Charles, not to reveal her own heart. Yet Marcus's compassion touched wounds she thought untouchable. Who truly sees me? She wondered. The man who vowed to love me, or the man who cleans my floors? The answer unsettled her. It was late evening when Charles finally returned after a week's absence. His suit carried the scent of unfamiliar perfume, a trace of someone else's touch. He entered Evelyn's room with a smirk, his tie loosened, his eyes gleaming with disdain. "You've become nothing but a burden," he sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "Do you even realize what I've sacrificed being tied down to this?" His hand gestured toward her chair as though she were an anchor chained to his life. The words struck Evelyn like a whip, but before she could respond, her eyes flicked to Marcus, standing quietly in the corner with his mop. His jaw tightened, his fists clenched at his sides. He said nothing, but the silence around him screamed with restrained fury. Evelyn's chest rose and fell, the storm inside her building with every breath. She had staged her test to reveal truth, and now it stood before her, undeniable and cruel. But in that moment, another truth shone brighter, the quiet strength of the man society overlooked. The man who carried her dignity in his hands when her own husband crushed it underfoot. Her heart trembled. The storm was coming. The papers arrived in a thick leather folder, heavy with legal language and the faint smell of Charles's cologne. Evelyn sat in her chair by the window, light spilling across her pale hands as Charles placed the documents on her lap. His smile was smooth, rehearsed, but his eyes betrayed urgency. "Darling," he said softly, too softly, "these are just for easier management. You shouldn't be burdened with the details of finances now. Let me handle everything. All you have to do is sign." Evelyn's fingers trembled, not from weakness but from the weight of the moment. She turned the pages slowly, her silence slicing through his performance. In the reflection of the glass she caught his jaw tighten, his patience fraying. Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she closed the folder with deliberate calm and set it aside on the table. The silence was her answer. Charles's mask shattered. His voice rose, sharp and venomous. "Do you think you can play games with me? Do you think you can sit there crippled, useless, and still cling to power?" His hand slammed against the armrest of her chair, the sound cracking through the room. Evelyn flinched but held her ground, her eyes glistening with both fear and defiance. The air thickened, every second pulling Charles closer to an eruption. His hand lifted, trembling in rage, a shadow falling across her cheek, and then Marcus stepped forward. He had been quietly polishing the silver near the door, invisible as always, but now he moved like a wall of strength. He positioned himself between Evelyn and Charles, his broad frame shielding her. His voice, low but steady, filled the silence like thunder. "Real love isn't measured in money or health," Marcus said, each word deliberate, each syllable heavy. "It's measured in how we stand when someone is broken." The room froze. The words landed harder than fists, echoing off the marble walls, cutting through Charles's fury. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Charles's eyes flicked from Evelyn's tearful face to Marcus's unyielding stance. And for the first time, he looked small. With a hiss of frustration, Charles yanked his hand back and stormed out, the slam of the door rattling the chandeliers overhead. Evelyn sat frozen, her breath uneven. Tears spilled down her cheeks, not from the fear of his rage, but from the clarity that now illuminated her heart. The test she had devised had laid bare everything, her husband's greed, his contempt, his hollow love. And yet, it had also revealed Marcus. Steady, protective, a man of truth in a house built on lies. When Marcus turned back to her, his eyes softened. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked gently. She nodded, though her voice failed her. That night, when the house grew still, Evelyn lay awake in her vast bed. The shadows on the ceiling twisted like the turmoil inside her. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the thrum of her heart against her palm. She cried, not from weakness, but from the strange liberation that clarity brings. She thought of Marcus's words, the way they carried more weight than all the empty promises Charles had ever spoken. She thought of the way Marcus had stood between her and violence, not out of obligation, but out of principle. But even as her heart reached for him, another fear rose like a wall. What would he think if he knew? If he discovered that her paralysis was nothing but a deception, a stage built from her desperation? Would his kindness sour into contempt? Would the man who had given her dignity see only betrayal? Her tears deepened at the thought. She had wanted to test Charles, but in truth she had tested herself, and the results had cut her open. The night pressed in, heavy with silence. Evelyn's whisper trembled into the darkness, fragile yet unyielding. I wanted to test him. But I tested myself. The words lingered in the air, a confession to no one but her own soul. The storm broke not with thunder, but with the sound of Evelyn's voice trembling in the stillness of the drawing room. Marcus had come to set the fire in the hearth, his presence as steady as ever, when she called his name. He turned, surprised by the urgency in her tone. Her hands clutched the arms of her chair, her breath sharp and uneven. "Marcus," she whispered, her eyes shimmering with fear and resolve. "There is something I must show you." Before he could respond, Evelyn pushed against the arms of the chair. Her legs trembled as though awakening from years of silence. Slowly, painfully, she rose. Her body wavered, tears spilling down her cheeks as she took a step forward. The sound of her foot against the floor echoed like a gunshot in the vast room. Marcus froze. His eyes widened, disbelief crashing into his face, followed swiftly by something darker, betrayal. "So all this time," his voice cracked heavy with hurt, "you were pretending?" Her knees almost buckled, not from weakness but from the weight of his words. She reached out, her voice raw. "I was afraid, Marcus. Afraid of him, afraid of myself. I needed to know if Charles's love was real, if his heart still saw me as more than a possession. So I built this prison of lies, and I chained myself in it." Marcus's jaw tightened, his silence cutting deeper than any accusation. She sank back into the chair, sobs shaking her shoulders. "I never meant to deceive you. I never meant to stain the kindness you gave me, but my heart was breaking, and I did not know where else to turn." At last, Marcus knelt before her. His rough hands, scarred from years of labor, reached gently for hers. His voice was low, steady, carrying both sorrow and mercy. "You tested him with lies," he said slowly. But you showed me your truth. I've seen your pain, Evelyn. That was never fake. Her breath caught, a fragile relief breaking through her grief. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not as a burden or a trophy, but as a soul clawing her way toward dignity. But the fragile peace did not last. The door flung open with a violent crash, and Charles strode in, his face twisted in fury. His eyes locked onto Evelyn standing near the chair, the remnants of her confession still glowing in the air. "You can walk." His words dripped venom. "All this time you played me for a fool." His laughter was jagged, brittle. "Do you know what this means? You've destroyed yourself. I'll tell the world. I'll ruin your name. You'll be nothing but a liar in their eyes." Evelyn rose again, but this time not with trembling fear. She stood tall, her voice steady, her tears dried to steel. "No, Charles. I will not cower anymore. You may call me a liar, but I know the truth of what I endured. And I know what you are," Charles sneered, stepping closer, his anger seeking to reclaim control. But Marcus moved between them once more, his presence unshakable. The air vibrated with unspoken defiance. Evelyn's voice carried across the room, clear and resolute. "You sought to break me, Charles, but in my brokenness I found strength. You may strip titles, tarnish reputations, but you cannot take my dignity. Not anymore." For a moment the mansion seemed to hold its breath. Charles's fury blazed, but it found no purchase. His threats fell against walls fortified by Evelyn's awakening. Marcus glanced back at her, his eyes soft with quiet pride. She had risen not just from the chair, but from the ashes of her own fear. The fire in the hearth crackled. The only sound as Charles turned away, defeated not by force, but by the strength of a woman who had reclaimed herself. Evelyn's chest rose and fell, her body trembling, but this time it was not weakness. It was freedom. The papers were signed in silence. Evelyn's hand, once trembling with hesitation, now moved with unwavering certainty as she drew the final line across the page. The echoes of the pen against parchment marked more than a divorce. It marked the burial of a life spent in gilded chains. Charles sat across from her, his face pale and contorted, no longer the suave man society once revered. His empire of charm and deception had crumbled, leaving behind only the bitter shell of a man stripped of power. "You'll regret this," he hissed, but the venom had no fangs. His threats, once heavy as iron, now rang hollow in the light of her newfound strength. Evelyn did not respond. She simply rose, leaving behind both the papers and the man who had long ago abandoned her heart. News traveled quickly. The city whispered of the heiress who had freed herself, of the husband cast aside like a fallen idol. Charles's name faded from the gilded invitations and echoing ballrooms where he once thrived. Wealth slipped through his fingers, and with it, influence. He became a shadow in the very circles he had once ruled. But Evelyn blossomed. The mansion that had once been a prison grew alive with laughter and purpose. She restructured her estate, ensuring every servant, every worker was treated with dignity. At the heart of this renewal stood Marcus. No longer the invisible janitor sweeping in shadows, he became her steward, her confidant, her anchor. She announced it without hesitation at a gathering in the grand hall, her voice steady as chandeliers glimmered above. "Marcus," she said, meeting his startled gaze, "has given this house more than service. He has given it soul. From this day forward he will be honored, not hidden." The applause was genuine. But Marcus's eyes told the deeper story, one of disbelief, humility, and a quiet gratitude that words could not carry. Days turned to weeks, and their bond deepened, not hastily, not with the fever of fleeting desire, but with the slow, steady burn of trust forged in fire. In the garden where Marcus once wheeled her, Evelyn now walked at his side. The roses swayed with the evening breeze, golden light painting their silhouettes. She touched his arm lightly, her voice softer than the wind. "You gave me back more than my legs," she whispered. "You gave me my heart." Marcus lowered his gaze, his voice rough with emotion. "All I ever did was see you when others refused." They walked in silence, their steps unhurried, their hearts aligned not by circumstance but by truth. No grand declarations, no gilded promises, only the quiet certainty of two souls who had discovered one another in the ruins of deception. As the scene lingered, The narration carried the story to its final truth. Love is never proven by comfort or wealth, but by presence in pain. The world crowns kings with gold, but the heart crowns heroes with kindness. The camera pulled back slowly, catching the vastness of the garden as twilight deepened. Evelyn and Marcus walked together beneath the fading sun, their figures bathed in golden light. Not mistress and servant, not heiress and janitor, just two souls united by compassion, by truth, by a love stronger than deception. The screen faded to black,